Hello, this is Ralph K. Ginorio. Give me a few minutes and I'll suggest an idea worth considering. Today's Tuesday, September the 11th, 2012. 11 years after America woke up to the reality of war. Now, there are things that I remember as a New Yorker, as a person who remembers the towers, being in them, who had a friend who worked in the towers between the two bombing attacks. There are things I remember. But as a historian, what I remember is why they happened, why the war is still going on. What's behind it is hate. It is a hatred for the West, for the Christian European West, for the world that was made when Europe spread out and contacted the rest of the world and woke it up from the savagery that most of it was embroiled in. Kipling's White Man's Burden poem was offensive to the modern ear, but it was a poem of service. What it was about was the noblesse oblige of those who have a vision of making the world a place worth living in. And you spend your life dedicated to making the lives of others better. Now, the European empires were not paragons of virtue. They certainly weren't perfect. But when you compare the British Empire to the Mongols, when you compare the Pax Americana to what the Russians did in Siberia, or to what the Chinese did to their own people, to what the Persians did in ancient times, the European empires did more than simply take and rule. They did build roads, they did build railways, they did try to build civilization. But America is not a European empire. In fact, after World War II, we were instrumental in destroying and taking apart the European empires. This isn't taught in schools in the United States or elsewhere, but the Suez Crisis was the key. Britain, France, and Israel were reasserting control over the Suez Canal. Russia supported the Egyptians. Dwight Eisenhower supported the Egyptians, pulling the rug out from under the British, humiliating the British, the French, and the Israelis, and convincing the British to abandon their empire wholesale as quickly as possible. After World War II, as the creditors of the European world, we ended the European empires and instead replaced it with American universities, American farming techniques, American hospitals, American education, American-supported native governments. Do we get credit for this Marshall Plan for planet Earth, for what is now called the Third World? Hell no. We're not even remembered for it. Instead, our enemies within the American left and outside view us as a successor state to the British Empire, when we were instrumental in taking the British Empire from Africa, from Asia, from the Middle East, and replacing it with governments of the people who lived there. No good deed goes unpunished. The Western world and the United States has taken the world out of its slumber and brought it into modernity. And it was done through colonization, and it was done through post-World War II Pax Americana aid. But it's been done. And we're hated for it. We're hated by the people who use our roads, who benefit by our health care, and who are fed by our farming techniques. We're hated in eloquent terms by people educated in our universities and protected by our military. Bad enough to be hated from people outside your society. The last time I talked about race and the unspeakability of race and the fact that since race was such a taboo subject, we would never grapple with it. Well, now, it's the unspeakability of hatred. The American left hasn't been behind a war since Moscow was threatened by German tanks. The American left has not been behind measures to bring genuine prosperity to middle-class Americans since John F. Kennedy lowered taxes and basically paved the way for Reagan's approach to healing the national economy in the 1980s. The American left does not benefit from American success or American people earning their own wealth. The American left has made common cause with Palestinian terrorists and communists around the world. The American left is counter-culture, counter-West, counter-mainstream, and it views the American people as a group of podunk serfs who need to be guided towards a better future. The arrogance in universities, with feminist professors deriding a culture of freedom that gave women the right to vote and equal citizenship as simply the product of a bunch of dead European white men. What rank, open racism and sexism that statement reveals. We live in a time, unfortunately, when our best and brightest, our core institutions, are corrupted. Our churches, our schools, our media, and many institutions in government. They're not loyal to the American dream. They're loyal to the new socialist utopia. They're not loyal to American and Western interests and legacies that make other people free around the world. They've made common cause with the colloquy of tyrants that is the United Nations. They're not on our side. It's a terrible thing to wake up and realize how thoroughly infiltrated we've become. But I can't think of a single institution of culture that somewhere in it doesn't have somebody who thinks it's their God-given duty to tear down the evil structure of capitalism and the West and give rein to the unfulfilled aspirations of the brown peoples of the world, the peoples of the sun. We're in it. We're in a world where our own leaders and our own best and brightest are not loyal to the dream of most Americans, the dream of freedom that inspires people around the world to want to become us. People around the world are prey to their own elites. They're enserfed by their own elites. And our elite, our best and brightest, is trying to do the same thing to us through national health care, through government environmental regulation, and through this concept of not being Americans anymore, but being members of some global community. Wake up and be well. Take your country back. God bless.